It's not uncommon to go through some hard times in your early 20s, whether that's trying to find a job to save money or starting a family with the right partner. You name it, and I'm sure there is a long list of people that share those struggles. I, of course, also went through some hard times in my early 20s, but I'm sure my situation is a little more unorthodox than that. I had every advantage in life growing up. I was funny, athletic, had a loving family and great friends, and I came from a wealthy enough background that as long as I applied myself, I could have a pretty comfortable life. Yeah, that didn't exactly happen. I was too obsessed with being the funny guy, and I was never going to be good enough to be a pro athlete by any means. I was good enough to play football in college, though. I decided in my senior year of high school that I would rather party and hang out with my friends. Sports isn't everything. My parents were cool with me giving football up, even if it meant giving up scholarships. I didn't have those sorts of parents that forced me to do sports or hobbies to get ahead. But I didn't expect that giving up that structure of football in my life forced me into doing some shady things in my free time. Long story short, I barely even made it through my senior year. And by the end of summer, I'd had a big falling out with my parents. I never went to college. Instead, I moved across to the East Coast for a few years, just being useless and offering nothing to society. Really looking back, I was hanging out with questionable people at best, and doing things I'm not very proud of. I have yet to come to peace with it now, and I'm in my 30s. My parents lived in Pennsylvania. I started making my way back up north when I was 22 years old in an attempt to kind of apologize and turn my life around finally. I had reached my breaking point and decided I couldn't be homeless anymore. I was starting to feel really sick, and I knew that something wasn't right on the inside. I hitchhiked a massive chunk of the journey, and when I reached Virginia, I started walking again. I didn't call my parents, though. I didn't think they ever wanted to see me or talk to me again. I also didn't have a phone or any way to reach them, really. My plan was just to show up on their doorstep and hope for the best. One night, I think I was still in Virginia. I was walking through this nice park. I'm not talking about those playground parks. This was a massive area of forest with all types of trails running through it. I bet during the day, under the right circumstances, this place was probably gorgeous. Tonight, though, the dark trails were quiet and desolate, and for the first time in a long time, I felt somewhat at peace. It was pitch black, but I didn't mind. I always liked the dark, especially since I had been homeless. I considered nightfall to be one of my best friends. I figured I would find a quiet place to lay down and get a relaxing night's sleep before the sun rose. Then I could continue my walk home. I was so exhausted that I fell asleep right away. I don't know how long I'd been sleeping when I was awoken slowly to the sound of whispering. One thing about being homeless is that you learn to kind of sleep with one eye open. I rolled to the side of the big tree I was leaning on and tried to focus in the darkness to see where the sounds were coming from. Well, I didn't need to be a detective to find the source. About 15 FT away from me was a group of men. I think there were 5 of them, but there may have been 1 or 2 more. They had flashlights and were shining them into the forest where I was laying. I heard one of the guys shout from the darkness, "He's over there." I know I saw a person sleeping. The light danced back and forth, and then the beam stopped directly on my face. The guy with the light shouted out, "Oh, dude, he's right here." I heard them continue to whisper and laugh. I didn't know what these guys wanted as I stared back like some frightened animal. The man holding the light said in a confident voice, "It's okay, dude. Come on out. Why are you sleeping out here in the woods?" For some reason, I felt safe about this and started making my way toward the group of guys. I told them I was homeless and trying to make my way back home. As I got closer, the guys were all eyeing me down. They seemed to be smiling like they were greeting an old friend. One of the guys grabbed my arm and helped me over to some rocks to join them. As soon as I was face to face with the group, the guy with the flashlight shouted, "Oh, dude, you reek." Another guy started to laugh uncontrollably. I started to feel kind of embarrassed. I was going to try and say something, but before I could even get any words out, The man with the flashlight struck me across my face with the light. I fell to the ground, holding my head in pain. I could hear the guy laughing and joking as they all started to kick me while I was down, screaming things like, "Get a job, deadbeat. Stop ruining our parks with your filth." I gave up trying to fight back after a while and just let the beatdown continue. They stopped after a few minutes. As I was laying there, I could feel the ground spinning beneath me. These guys had done a real number on me. They started to talk among themselves about something completely unrelated. A girl from class or something. I couldn't believe they'd just beaten me so badly that I couldn't even see straight, and they were completely unfazed while talking about this girl. I tried to get up and make a run for it, but as soon as I got to my feet, I felt dizzy. The world started spinning as I tried to take a step. I must have looked real messed up because the guys started to cackle right behind me. Through their hysterical laughter, one of the guys looked at me. Look at him, trying to run. Look how stupid he looks. I'm not sure how far I made it before I felt an intense pain in the back of my head. Everything went completely black. I remember these passing moments, seeing the guys walking by and laughing. The only thing I can really remember is they were roughly college. It had to be since they were talking about people in class. I think one of them had a Virginia University shirt on. Next thing I remember is waking up in the woods surrounded by a few different people. They were hikers on their phone with the paramedics. I was somehow able to form enough sentences to tell them my name and a few details of the prior evening. One of the women who was sitting with me while waiting for the paramedics asked if she could call someone for me. This is when I finally broke down and just called my parents on her phone. They wasted no time and drove down to Virginia to get me and make sure I was all. I've met a lot of sketchy people over the years. I used to run with a bad crowd, do drugs and the like, but for some reason, this one experience really sticks out to me. There was just something oddly cinematic about the whole thing. I suppose I'll start by mentioning that I'm a 30-something woman living in a country-ish area on the west coast of the USA. It's a smaller town, but not so small. It's completely isolated. It's just that there can be long stretches of land between some of the homes. One of those stretches has a rundown but pretty swell deli that sells wine and other convenience store stuff. I'd been in there before during the day, and all around. The people in there seemed really friendly. I'd never gotten a bad vibe off of any of them. Usually, I'd grab my bag of chips or my daily selection or whatever and leave. The worst complaint I could possibly have was that some of them only spoke partial English. But that didn't really bother me much, and it never interfered with their job. That is, until I finally decided to go there at nighttime. I was having a rough day, so I decided to grab a bottle of wine on my way home from work for the weekend. I took the stretch of road leading to that convenience store. I remember thinking that I'd never noticed how creepy it was at night. If it was raining, it would have been right out of the movie Psycho, where Janet Leigh is pulling up to the hotel. Anyway, I get in there, prepared to just grab my wine and get out. But it seemed like the man working at the store had some other ideas. When he heard me walk in, he rushed out from the back and had the most intense and frightening, unwavering stare I'd ever seen. I remember I was so off. I tried to physically act nonchalant in response and say something to the tune of "Hi there." I don't remember him blinking a single time during this entire encounter. The whole thing was just so creepy, coupled with how quiet the store was and how dark it was outside. I can't remember exactly what I said after, but nothing I did would break his unblinking gaze. He wouldn't respond to anything I said either. At one point, he asked me if I spoke Spanish. I said no. At that point, I relaxed a bit. Maybe it was just him being uncomfortable at not being able to speak English well. I felt a bit more at ease. I even felt a bit bad for him, actually. I'm sure people can be quite awful to workers who don't speak great English. That calm didn't last long, though. Almost immediately after, he followed up speaking English very well. "You are so beautiful. Do you have a boyfriend?" This admittedly threw me off a bit because I'm fairly chubby and was by no means made up at all. He started bombarding me with questions. Where do you live? Do you come by here a lot? When will I see you again? I kept saying the usual. Oh, that's nice kind of stuff, just to get out of there. After what seemed like an excruciating amount of time, made worse by this unblinking stare, the transaction was finally completed. I thought I'd made it home free until I noticed he was following me outside. He left the inside of the store completely unattended, staring at me with the same creepy smile the entire time. I fumbled for my keys and tried to start my car to get out of there. The lighting at the front of the store, shining on him against the dark night, was like a scene straight out of a horror film. He stood there a couple of feet away from my car, watching me try to get it started. He didn't say a goddamn word. I could feel him staring at me for minutes on end. Though when I finally did back out of that driveway and onto the main road, I watched him in the rearview mirror as he followed me out into the center of the road, then stared at me the entire way out until I hit the first curve, and he disappeared out of sight. Friendly day crew or no friendly day crew, I never went back there again. This is hands down the only time in my life my gut reacted this strongly to a stranger, so I thought it was worth it to share. One extremely rare, no work, no class day when I was 19 years old, I decided to go thrifting. I drove a few towns over to a store in a rural area where I'd always had decent luck before. I decided to do a gallery wall in my bedroom and needed some cheap frames. I'm on the phone with my mom as I meander through the store. As I approached the aisle with the frames, I noticed a 30 to 40-ish-year-old man standing there all alone. He was not in an aisle or looking at anything really. Rather, he was staring at me with a large, almost comical grin on his face. In the back of my mind, I recalled how long I'd been in the store so far. About 5 to 10 minutes in total. I wondered if he'd been staring at me the entire time, and somehow I just never noticed. The prospect of that made me feel real weird. Not wanting to take any chances and believing back then I could dispel any potential weirdness with direct confrontation, I looked him in the eyes and said, "How's it going, bud? Need something?" in a tone that I hoped implied I'm not interested in any sort of weird today. He didn't say anything, almost like what I'd said didn't even register with him. He just kept staring as I walked past with a huge bizarre grin on his face. All right, yeah, whatever, weirdo. I rounded up an armful of frames and began laying them out on the floor. It's early afternoon on a weekday, and there were very few people in the store I would be inconveniencing by doing this. Sitting on the floor, looking through all the different frames, and still on the phone with my mom, I noticed a shadow hovering over my work. It dawned on me that the man not only hadn't moved on to keep shopping, he was now silently standing over me. My mom picked this moment to want to hang up on me, of course. I tried to stall her, but she was at work, so I had to let her go. I refused to be deterred from my mission, though. So I glanced over at the man and kept arranging. At this point, though, the warning bells were reaching atomic levels in my brain. I was starting to get a bit jittery. I had never had this reaction before to a stranger, just acting strange, so something was definitely wrong here, even if I hadn't noticed what quite yet. Grinning and staring, he finally says, "You're pretty." Thanks," I reply. "Where do you go to school?" I was so weirded out at this point that I actually blurted out the truth. There are 14,000 students at my university. Anyway, I thought to myself, he has no idea who I am. He'll never find me, if worse came to worst. He didn't say another word and continued to stare, still grinning. At this point, I couldn't even focus anymore. I gathered up whatever I had on the floor and stood up to leave, pretending to answer my phone. 19-year-old me who wouldn't have dreamed of abandoning a conversation without a polite exit, even with a weirdo straight up turned and left this guy there. I made my way to the checkout and prayed he wouldn't follow me and wait in line. He didn't. Surprisingly, he actually left. Oh, thank God, I thought. Why are some people so oblivious to social awkwardness? More so. Why was I so freaked out by this dude in particular? It's not like he's the first person who ever tried to get a bit creepy with me. I stood in the long line, inspecting my personal purchases. I was a little bit impressed that despite my distress, the haphazard grab I made yielded some real good finds. It's important to note at this point that there's a main entrance at the front of the building and a side door equidistant to the corner as the front door. The parking area is in an L shape surrounding the exits. My car was parked smack dab on the corner, right in between the two of them. From any point in the store, you cannot see my car. I let my gaze drift over to the side exit where I see a man walking through the parking lot. There he goes, the weirdo. As he walks, he's staring at me through the door. A minute later, I saw him pass by the front entrance. That was a bit weird. There was no exit to the road from that direction. You couldn't even get to the sidewalk from there. Maybe his car was parked over that way. He was still staring at me. Another minute passed by and he reversed course, meandering past the front entrance again, then past the side entrance. Over and over, the whole time still making eye contact with me as I'm waiting inside the store. It dawned on me in that moment that he was covering the exits and my car. But how did he know that was my car? Well, because I told him which school I went to, and I had my bright yellow school parking pass hanging on the dashboard, plain as day. Being a cocky 19-year-old means you don't often realize you should be worried about some things. And yet I was petrified when I realized this. I did something I'd never done until then and haven't had to do since. Red, faced and flustered, I told the cashier because I didn't know what to do. She immediately offered to grab a male employee to walk me to my car, and before me appeared a high school friend who'd forgotten he even worked there. He grabbed my bags and walked me over to my vehicle, where the man was standing right next to my driver's side door. My friend loaded my things into the back seat, actually having to move this guy out of the way. We made a few words of small talk while the guy stood awkwardly in our conversation, clearly trying to appear casual and unsure how to proceed with whatever he had been trying to do. My friend closed my door behind me and gave the man a pointed look. He started to wander away, and I sped away toward the road. In my rearview mirror, I could see the man walking out of the parking lot toward the road. He hadn't even arrived in a car or with anyone. He wasn't waiting for anyone except for me. When I left, his business was finished or perhaps even thwarted. I couldn't stop wondering if his plan had just continued. Would he have taken me by force? I also later had a light bulb moment. He asked me which school I went to, not which college. I looked much younger back then than I do now. People used to ask me what high school I went to well into my mid-20s. Well, looking back, I'm positive he said school because he meant high school.